Hey guys. So this set of flip notes is going to be about the Athenians and the Spartans. So a couple of things to remember about the Greeks and their social structures are that in voting processes and in governmental laws and regulations, the only people considered to be citizens are going to be, at first, property-owning free adult males. We like to, in America, when we're talking about limitations of voting rights, talk about how they're white males. That's not the case in Greece. Number one, because we're talking about the Greeks, and generally when we picture like traditionally white people, we're talking about more Northern European people, but also because the Greeks in their colonial system are going to be accessing not just Europe, but also the Middle East and Northern Africa. And as long as you were a free adult and generally property-owning male, you're counted as a citizen and are then not only given political rights like for the Athenians, such as voting, but you're also expected to participate in the government in whatever capacity necessary. If you're called to serve, you serve. If you're called to be in the military, you serve in the military. Your participation in the government is not a voluntary thing generally. It is an expectation, just like we expect people to pay taxes and that sort of thing. It's key to remember that women, people who move in from foreign places, not places taken over by the Greeks, but people who transfer in and then sort of like first generation immigrants, but not second generations, and slaves, of course, are not going to have any political rights. The Athenians are famous for being the first direct democracy of their kind, which means that every single person votes. That comes about in about 621 BC. So if I was going to pull up my calculator, I'll remember that the American Republic is founded in 1776. Plus, you add on the 621 years before the change in time, and that gives you 2,400 years the Greeks are doing direct democracy before the Americans begin voting. They also have a regular set of meetings that people would meet, citizens, remember, so those generally free property-owning males are going to meet to discuss and vote on what's best for the city. In 621, so around that same time, Draco comes to power and writes the first legal code of Athens, basing it on citizens' equality. He discusses things like contracts and property laws. It's super harsh. He does take away a lot of the protection that the rich people have, but he also institutes something called debt slavery, which is really genuinely exactly what it sounds like. It's if you had a contract, like a loan contract, and you could not fulfill that contract, you could put up for collateral your actual freedom. So, for instance, like let's say you're going to buy a house, and so you had a loan taken out, and if you could not pay back your loan, then instead of like in modern times we repossess your house, the person that loaned you the money for that house could own you as a slave until you worked off your debts. So it's very sort of strict and specific. Then Solon comes to power shortly thereafter, and he basically thought, like, this is ridiculous. Oh my gosh, you can't own people just because you made a bad debt, you made a bad loan, it's not their fault. So he gets rid of debt slavery, but also then what he does is he creates the legal system. He creates a system where you can sue people. So, for instance, you make the bad loan, you can't own the person as a slave, but you can sue them and take back the money that you needed. Another person from Greek history that I like, and honestly I really like to say his name because I think it's funny, his is Stratus. He comes to power and he creates a welfare program. He creates a way for funds to be provided to peasants to buy farming equipment, which is basically similar to some of the programs that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has in the United States. All right, so just some things that we get from the Athenians, which you might remember from civics class. Things, democratic principles like direct democracy and debate, and the fact that you need to vote in the government, you need to participate in the government, and some of our basic fundamental principles about how governments should function are all harkening back to the Athenians. So the Spartans are almost the exact opposite of them. Remember that they are harsh and they are militaristic and they are run by a council of people, the elders who make all the decisions for the entire government. They do break their classes into citizens, non-citizens, and slaves. So obviously citizens of Sparta are the same sort of format as citizens of the Athenians, though women actually were going to be considered citizens because in Sparta there's a lot more women's rights, because when men are off at war, women are running Sparta. Women have the same responsibilities that we see in modern American history, like when you talk about during World War II when the women were running doctors and they were being lawyers and they were running factories like Rosie the Riveter kind of things. All of that is a very Spartan concept of women stepping up, which would not have been necessarily the same concept in a lot of the ancient world because they don't give women any credit. Non-citizens are going to be not slaves, but also not going to enjoy the same kinds of rights that the Spartans have. Foreigners are going to be included in that group. And then remember that they are the most powerful, most well-trained, most specifically awesome, really, for lack of a better word, military in all of Greek history. And they value strength and individuality and discipline. We talked about all this a little bit when we talk about this in class, but they have things like pulling children out of their homes and into the military barracks at 7, and how you're going to serve in the military until you're 30, and this says serve till you're 60 and train until you're 30. You're an active duty member of the military until you're 30, and then for the next 30 years you're in reserves. Girls are trained in art of warfare as well, not in the same manner, but they're taught a lot of sort of the Olympic strength events like javelin and discus and that sort of thing. They're taught the same kind of discipline values and that sort of thing. And that's it. So don't forget to write everything down, and remember that you have a couple of activities like the brochure and that sort of thing generally assigned for this. So remember that's not just it for the Athenians and the Spartans. Let me know if you have questions.